It has now been over 1 year since I first showed Teardown on YouTube, and my video about Teardown has gone on to be my most viewed video that I've ever created, and even still, the most viewed video of Teardown on YouTube so far. Almost 3 million views. That's amazing. I was even more surprised when the developer of Teardown messaged me on Twitter offering me a preview copy of the game with absolutely no conditions other than a small request to remind people to wishlist the game on Steam. Which, by the way, if you haven't already, make sure you go wishlist Teardown on Steam. But now, after nearly 1 month of playing hours of the Teardown Technical Alpha preview, I want to give a formal review of my experience playing the game, as well as feedback to hopefully make the game even better in the future. Keep in mind, the version I am reviewing now is merely an alpha demo of the game. The official release of the game will include a significantly greater amount of content. However, this demo still provides a pretty good picture of how the destruction mechanics and the physics of the game will work. So, of course, the first thing that I'm going to want to talk about is destruction. Now, destroying things in Teardown is incredibly satisfying, but it isn't without its limitations. Compared to other games like, say, Red Faction Guerrilla, Teardown doesn't have an integrity system, so that means that buildings won't fall down by their weight alone. If there's still a single piece of a building remaining, or if the chunk of the building remaining is too large, it won't always simulate that part of the structure collapsing. This means that Teardown's building destruction is much more simplified than I think a lot of people, including myself, had initially assumed that it would be. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because the game does run very, very well, and I have a feeling that if the game did simulate structural integrity at that scale, we would not be seeing the level of performance that we see in the technical alpha that I was able to play. Additionally, another big aspect of what makes Teardown really, really cool is the parts of the environment that can bend and break. This is something else that I think I need to clarify. In previous videos, I was under the assumption that all of the different parts of the buildings and structures could bend. But it seems also the developer is really, really tricky with how he implements this. Instead of having single continuous voxel creations actually bending, what he does instead is have multiple segments that are still destructible and are still voxel based, but are instead attached to one another by joints, giving the illusion that the entire piece is bending when in fact it's single segments that are attached to one another that are bending at a specific fixed joint. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because the game does run really, really well. However, there are a lot of things in the game that give the illusion of something happening when in reality the model is much more simplified. And that's actually a pretty good thing, since blowing things up still feels really, really satisfying. And in addition to that, the game, for the most part, runs really, really well. Next, I want to talk about fire and water. So in Teardown, there are really interesting mechanics for fire and also for burning things down. Now, lighting things on fire and watching them burn down is really, really satisfying. And I would actually say that some of the best mechanics in this game is the fire mechanics, where you also have these volumetric clouds of smoke billowing out of the fires that you start, and watching them go through the buildings and collect at the top of the ceilings. It's really, really cool. Now, unfortunately, in the technical alpha that I played, it appears that the settings for how much volumetric smoke you can actually generate and how long it lasts is much less than in previous videos that I've covered on this channel. So before, you would be able to start a fire and you would see just monumental amounts of smoke pouring out of the buildings. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, that seems to have been considerably toned down. But regardless, even with the smoke being much less than what I thought it was going to be, setting fires, watching them propagate throughout the building, and watching the building slowly collapse piece by piece is really, really cool. The fact that you can also set fire to other things like vehicles and then ram that into a building and watch the fire propagate from the vehicle to the rest of the building is also really interesting. And I think that if the developers wanted to, they could use that for really interesting game mechanics in the future. Think using a trebuchet and setting fire to the projectile so that you can set a castle on fire. I don't know, things like that have real potential with a game like this. Inversely, however, the water in Teardown is considerably more simplistic. When you compare it to the smoke or whatever the material it is that you fire out of the fire extinguisher in Teardown, the water is not volumetric. So when you compare it to something like Stormworks or even other physics-based games that I've covered on this channel that have volumetric water, Teardown does not have that feature. So you cannot put water in a bucket and use that to put out fires. Also, when you destroy boats, the boats will not take on water and sink realistically. In fact, if you think about it in a way, the boats in Teardown almost feel as if they're completely made out of styrofoam. So it doesn't matter what part of them you destroy, they will always be floating. With that said, however, ramming a boat into the shoreline and destroying houses with it never gets old. Next, I want to talk about modding. Modifications for Teardown has been a big thing that the developers have been promoting about their game from the very beginning, even promoting the mod tools that they're going to be creating for the game on the front page of their website about Teardown. So, with all of my fans asking me about how modifiable Teardown is, even in its current state, as well as the developers giving somebody like me, somebody who doesn't even work for them, even remotely, a copy of the game, letting me do whatever I want, naturally, the first thing I'm going to do is go in and see what kinds of things I can change. And I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised by this. After going to the front page of their website and following their directions on how to create voxel assets for their game, I really quickly put together a couple of custom weapons and put them into the game in a matter of minutes. Now, I haven't found out everything that is possible to do in terms of adding new content and modifying things in the current version of the game, but if they continue adding support for official modifications in the future, if it is already this easy, I can only imagine it's going to get easier and even cooler as time goes on. In fact, after posting my first video showing the custom weapon I added into Teardown, I was really surprised to see other developers, in reaction to my video, posting their own videos of custom weapons that they were modding into the game as well in exactly the same way. I thought that was really interesting, and I think it also shows how easy it is to modify Teardown even in the current state. I was hoping to see some of the other creators who were given access to Teardown trying their hand at making some of their own mods, but for some reason, nobody did. Hopefully that changes. But either way, I'm not going to tell other creators how they should make videos about Teardown. I'd have to be a pretty petty person to do that, right? Lastly, I want to talk about two big things. I want to talk about the game's performance, and I also want to talk about the missions and content that is currently in the game. The game runs really well, and except when you're doing big things like ramming a yacht into a shoreline, the game functions perfectly. All of the mechanics are really satisfying, and even though there's a few gimmicks here and there which make the game run much better, everything works as you would more or less expect it to work, which I think is what we all really want. Most of the advanced physics simulators out there that do crazy things and simulate every single particle also need a supercomputer to run. Well, Teardown can do that and give you that same experience for the most part, but it won't melt your computer, and that's absolutely fantastic. However, one thing that I was really disappointed by, and I don't think is allowing Teardown to meet its true potential, is the kind of missions and the kind of content that is currently in the game. Now, the most enjoyable game mode that I experienced was the helicopter game mode. This is where you had to run around and hack a bunch of terminals and escape while a helicopter with machine guns and rockets tries to hunt you down the entire time. Unfortunately, you cannot shoot down or in any way damage the helicopter, and this is a theme seen throughout the entire game, at least so far. It is primarily a puzzle or speedrunning based game. The objectives are all primarily non-violent, and even the few engagements or altercations that you can get into, there are immortality or god settings that forbid you from actually hurting anything in any way that could be construed as genuine combat. And with a game that has as advanced a destruction model as Teardown, I find it somewhat odd to not have, or at least allow, more traditional combat experiences in the game, especially since it is so obviously capable of providing that experience. After all, I think this is probably one of the only games that gives you a rocket launcher, but doesn't actually give you anyone to fight with a rocket launcher. And even in previous videos, the developers have showcased a bunch of different potential enemies that you could fight in the game, but I'm not entirely sure if those are going to be present in the final release. I hope that they will. So if there was any one thing that I could point to in the current iteration of Teardown that I think could use improvement, it's definitely the existing missions in the game. The game is really fun. The weapons are great. The shotguns, the pistol, the rocket launchers, all of these things, even the vehicles are fantastic. But currently, it is more of a puzzle / speedrunning game. And that's a really awkward combination, or at least it's a really awkward thing to force a game like this to be contained within. So if there is anything that I could suggest, or any feedback that I could have on how to give this game the best chance at being successful, it would be this. Don't lock down your game. Don't keep your game from realizing its own potential. A game like Teardown is honestly much bigger than itself. It's a platform, it's an idea, it's a concept for voxel-based physics that's much bigger than any single genre or any single game mode. And I think that there are already a lot of fantastic sandbox games that make this same mistake, where they don't truly allow the community to have full control over creating the kind of experience that the community wants to have. And I think that Teardown, if managed correctly, has the potential to fill this vacuum in the market of a physics-based voxel game that functions as a true platform. In its current state, Teardown is a fun puzzle game, but it gets old pretty fast. But I think that this could be something so much bigger than that. And I hope that the developers realize that before it's too late. Well, that's it from me for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you join our Teardown modding community. There is a link to a server down below in the description. It is a Discord server where we discuss everything voxel, other voxel games, voxel creations, modifications that are going to be compatible for Teardown, and all sorts of other voxel-based games. I think that's actually a really cool thing about the voxel creations and the voxel assets that are being used in Teardown. They use a universal format that is also compatible with all sorts of other games. So if you want to get started in game development, you want to get started screwing around with voxels and creating cool things, join our community down below in the description. And as always, if you enjoyed this as well, subscribe to this channel. More Teardown videos are going to be coming your way, and I can't wait to see what you guys are capable of. All right, I will see you guys again soon, and remember, as always, Blue Drake loves you.